I genuinely want to know why more people aren't talking about the Saturn 8K. After all, it is Elegoo's latest 8K printer, and it's got a 10-inch screen. In fact, most of the specs are identical to the Saturn II, except it's 4 cm shorter in print volume, but it's $100 cheaper. So if you're looking for your next 3D printer purchase, why go for the Saturn II if this will do everything that you want? Well, I'm going to show you this printer's value in its own right, so at least then you can consider it as your next purchase. And with that, hi, I'm Ross, and this is Fohammer Videos. So whilst my Saturn II was a purchase I made for my video review, this was actually a gift from Elegoo, the Saturn 8K. And whilst yes, it deserves its own review in isolation of the other product, it's hard to pretend that the Saturn II doesn't exist. And I know with most people finding that their most popular choice of next printer, what exactly does this do so that you can compare and decide which one's right? And once again for this review, like many of my other reviews, I've printed miniatures, I've printed busts, I've printed dioramas. Now, whilst we both want to jump into exactly how this printer performs, we've got to go through some prerequisites that are kind of required in a review. So let's quickly talk about the specs and the features. So like I said in the intro, you've got here a printer with a 10-inch screen and an 8K display. This is already my favourite type of printer at the moment when comparing these to something like obviously the Saturn II, but the Anycubic M3 Premium and the Sonic Mighty 8K. And all of those printers, including this one, boast a 28.5 micron pixel size on the XY axis. When it comes to the external dimensions though, that's where this printer differs. It's actually the smallest of all 4 of these 28.5 micron printers. Simply, it's 30 by 27 by 57 centimeters. Now for the pixel resolution this boasts, there's a lot to cram in this small form factor. But honestly, we're kind of in a bit of a weird position with this because bigger printers tend to be better, but if you've got a space constraint or if you're wanting to run a printer farm, then a smaller printer might actually be the one to go for. Now I'm going to skip the unboxing because it's boring and blah blah, you take it out of a box. They're well packed, they're covered in polystyrene, and if you get any damage then it's probably due to a courier. As for the stuff you get with it, well again, standard, you get some gloves, you get an instruction booklet, you get some Allen keys and some other bits like scrapers, and again they all give you rubbish USB drives. My tip to you, copy the files from this onto your computer, then throw it in the bin. One of the bonus features you get with this one, just like with the Saturn II and the M3 Premium, you get an integrated carbon filter with a massive carbon block inside. These plug in inside the machine under the UV filter and will stay on whenever your printer's printing. There's no included screen protector, but it is quite clear that you've got a tempered glass cover on top of the LCD, which is absolutely fantastic. In case you get resin spills, you can just cure it and scrape it off. And it clearly states that once you've taken off the protective layer of film, don't try and then peel off this tempered glass layer because you'll break the LCD. Leveling is super easy. Just loosen the screws, put in the leveling card / leveling instructions, then press home as soon as it hits the bottom, tighten up the screws and then just lift the bed. That's it, done. It is worth noting though that the build plate is held on to the Z-arm with this ball joint axis, and I don't like these, a lot of people don't like these, but it's worth me telling you why. The problem with these are, it's easy to do and it's easy to set up, but unfortunately they just don't stay in place. So after a few prints, you're going to have to re-level the entire thing, which unfortunately the second time after you've printed means cleaning the whole thing down so that you don't get resin all over your LCD. I really wish Elegoo had stopped doing these, but I don't know whether it's a cost-saving measure or what, but they are just annoying after time. And I also want to call out that unlike the Saturn II, this one doesn't make a noise when you turn it on. In fact, the fan only kicks in when it's printing. Hooray! What a sensible way to do things, Elegoo. One annoying feature is that, like many products now, they've stuck the USB port on the side and at the back, not on the side at the front. So it's a bit annoying to get to, especially if you've got multiple things around your printer. And this is the third Elegoo printer in a row where I want to call out a specific issue. Because the edges of the vat are so close to the edges of the build plate, as the build plate lifts, any wet resin that falls off causes splashes that go inside the unit, out of the vat, and go down the inside of the UV filter. And I have to call out one comment on my last video asking what special kind of fool pours resin from a height and then complains about splashes. Well, I'm guessing a special kind of fool who can both pour resin in whilst the lid's on if it's going on the inside of the lid. The problem's actually caused because every time the printer finishes a print, it lifts to its maximum height. So if you're printing something like an exposure finder or a miniature, then it still goes to the top when it's complete, with a lot of wet resin still on top of the build plate. So it falls from a greater height, bigger fall, bigger splash. Now you can apparently fix this yourself by installing some special G-code onto the printer, but really, Elegoo should sort it. So being a bit cheeky, I just decided to port my settings over from the Saturn II directly into the Saturn 8K. This was everything from exposure time and layer height to the lift height. And it's worth noting here that because this is a larger printer, your lift distance should generally be a bit higher than that of your standard printers. Because the release film's larger, it has more area to stretch before the model releases from it. And I couldn't find online whether Elegoo used the new NFET product that everyone's going on about, which is generally tougher, lasts longer and doesn't need to stretch as far, but they do have PFA 2.0, which I'm assuming is the same thing. In either case, the lift distance on this is identical to that on my M3 Premium, which does have MTHEP. Once again, I'm using the Elegoo 8K Space Grey resin, which is rapidly becoming my favourite resin. It's smooth where it needs to be and sharp where it needs to be, just like the frozen 8K resin. But what I love about this is it's got a lot more flex in it once the model's printed, which for miniatures is absolutely spot on. So when this first range of prints came off, which includes my standard Wolverine bust for comparing to other printers, and also some models of my own head and a statue of myself, which is anatomically accurate, mostly anyway. I was actually surprised to find that the Saturn 8K was overexposed. I mean, it's got a LED array with fewer LEDs in it, so you'd think less powerful light? Now, I didn't actually believe these results, so I went to my exposure test finder and confirmed that yeah, at the same settings as the Saturn II, this is overexposing my prints. So that means I can actually reduce the exposure time on the Saturn 8K, resulting in faster prints than the Saturn II? So okay, let's print some exposure tests then. And I know, you hate printing exposure tests, but if you want to have a real problem, try reviewing printers. I have to do this with every single one. So I stepped down, I went to 2.5, that was still overexposed, 2 seconds, overexposed, 1.7, overexposed, so it seemed. Then I went all the way down to 1 second, which, well, that seemed the correct exposure, but I was losing some of the detail on the print. So then I went up to 1.4, down to 1.2, and then just for good measure, I even printed at 1.1. And the way I like to do my exposure tests is really simple. I just use this old XP rangefinder, which I think is by Photonsters, and I ignore most of it. All I want to know is how many posts and how many holes there are. And I count a hole as any hole which is visibly smaller than the hole previous. And all I want to do is make sure the number of posts match the number of holes. If you've got more posts, you're overexposed. If you've got more holes, you're underexposed. So long as the numbers match, that to me is a good initial exposure time. So I found that I got the best exposure results at 1 second a layer. That's significantly different to the 3.7 seconds on the Saturn 8K. Now, to properly compare this to the Saturn II, I really need to go back and do more tests on the Saturn II with very much these exposure tests and also some models that I can compare. But at the moment, it's looking to me like the Saturn 8K is a faster machine with the same spec, but 4 seconds lower. At least at this point it was anyway. So following my own tried and tested method, I printed one of these Plague Demon models from One Page Rules at 1 second layer times. And it's worth noting, if you didn't notice earlier, I'm printing at 30 micron layers and my room temperature is roughly 20 to 22 degrees, normally. And it was a mostly successful print, but there was some detail loss under the chin and on the underside of the weapon. I upped my exposure time to 1.2 seconds and the next print failed miserably. However, I think this was due to a temperature drop that night because the printer next to it also failed and that printer had known good settings. So I just went straight in again and printed the same again. No settings changed, just clean off the tray and the printer vat, print it again. But despite me doing the same on my other printer, which had no good settings and had a successful print the next time, this one failed yet again. So looking at my exposure test files, I had a look at the one which didn't have any of the details fail in the bottom sections. That's the little thin fanes at the bottom. And it turns out that 1.7 seconds was actually the one looking a bit more ideal. Yes, it was technically a bit bloated and overexposed, but it made sure that the details were retained in the thin edges. And this time, successful print. So that's it, fully dialed in, 1.7 seconds at 30 micron layers. But to be honest, that's fairly typical. What I usually do is follow the process I mentioned earlier of counting the holes and the posts, but then I tend to up it just a bit for miniatures because they've got really fine details and really thin supports. So first I want to talk about the Wolverine model, which is printed at 3.5 seconds, copying the settings from the Saturn II. And as you can see, it's completely overexposed. If we have a look at the refined 1.7 second print, this is incredibly sharp and super detailed. And I'm sure you'll agree, the Saturn 8K in its own right, I can't see that anybody would be disappointed with prints like this. And I did print a few things in that first batch, including a model of myself, which was actually scanned using a RevoPoint Pop 2, which is up for an upcoming future video. I scanned my head, but had to have it refined by my friend Dan from the Lions Tower Miniatures. Nevertheless, it let me create my own bust, my own sculpt, which I've printed at both tall and miniature scale. But my real plan is printing out a legion of Space Marines, and on just one build plate to show you the volume, you can print out 578 separate heads. This sculpt was created using that scan and by a friend of mine over at the Custom Bit, who makes multiple things that are compatible with Warhammer miniatures, including Spartan and Samurai pieces. And I think you'll agree, this is pure nightmare fuel. And if for some crazy reason you want a copy of this head, then come and join us on Patreon and I'll give it away if you want. That'll probably put more people off. Some more on this Wolverine bust. I also want to compare it to the Sonic Mini 8K, which spec-wise is the current leader when it comes to XY resolution at only 22 microns versus the 28.5 you get from the Saturn 8K. And just like in my previous videos with similar sized printers, I challenge anyone to find a significant difference in quality between the two. One print which wasn't even going to make this video, but it was released like the night before I was about to compile everything, I just had to print it. And that's this Isabel the Matriarch sculpt by CA Sculpts. You may remember them from the For Honor and For Glory Samurai busts that I printed in my previous videos. And I actually reduced this down to about 60% actual size, so that A, I could fit it on one build plate, but B, so that the face matched those previous dioramas. And despite there being a few scuffs and scratches on there, you'll probably realise, just like me, that that's the only defects on this model. You can't make out layer lines, you can't make out voxels. The only problems are the dust and fingerprints and general scratches that I've caused by mishandling it. Honestly, and I'm waiting for someone to put down in the comments, what a time to be alive. Just look at this thing. Look at that detail. But as you know, I like miniatures, and I've kind of got a habit of taking things from Blackforge games which are intended to be printed at massive scale. I mean, this thing's huge, probably 30 to 40 centimeters tall usually. So I've shrunk it down to the equivalent of 32mm miniature scale and printed it out just so you can see how at small scale it captures so many of those minute details that you wouldn't even see normally. No matter where you buy from, if you're buying miniatures that are plastic, if they're resin sculpts, you simply don't get detail like this. I want to do a huge thanks to Blackforge Games for continuing to support me. I absolutely love their models, and if you've got a 3D printer, you need to go and buy one because they are some of the best I have ever had the pleasure to print, and their supports are absolutely incredible. Just look at some of the details on this, like the actual texture in the cloak, the feathers, the arms. Not only that, you can see things like veins in the skin, but you can also see skin definition, muscle tone, and pores. Tell me with a straight face that you've seen a retail model with this much detail. If they're out there, I've never seen them, so I kind of want you to point that out so I can get one and compare it. And then miniatures wise, and I gave them a hard time in the last video, but this Battle Sister by One Page Rules is just brilliant. And if you're into wargaming, then let's be honest, One Page Rules is the 3D printer's version of Warhammer. And I have to say it in case it's not obvious, but with the quality allowed by these 3D printers, the miniatures you get from 3D printing are more detailed than the plastic alternatives that you can get. And also, supports are easy. Just give them a twist and snap them off. There's no building or any mold line scraping that you need to do. Once you've twisted it off the supports and let it dry, it's ready to paint. So that's it guys, the Saturn 8K is an incredible printer in its own right. Now I am going to do a further video doing a full comparison of this and the Saturn II, but I hope you've seen enough here to really make that choice anyway. The only reason for making that additional video is to do a fair summary of the two for anyone who doesn't want to sit through two of my vids. Should you buy this printer? Well, it really depends. Like, are you trying to save a bit of money on a Saturn II? Like, a lot of people are saying, yeah, the Saturn II is sharper, and again, I need to do that other video to do some direct comparisons, and I need to spend more time with my Saturn II, printing off a lot more exposure tests and seeing what it does so I can do a direct like-for-like comparison. But in all honesty, when people are saying I can't tell the difference between a 28.5 micron Saturn II and the Sonic Mini 8K with 22 microns, then how are they going to tell the difference between two 28.5 micron printers? I mean, don't get me wrong, the difference is probably there, but are you even going to be able to tell? And would you be disappointed with any of these miniatures I've shown here? I don't think so. Anyway, your call. Most people are still going to buy the Saturn II anyway because it's the more popular one. So what's the point of me doing this vid? Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you stay tuned next time for more 3D printing content we've got coming up. And it's not just 3D printing content, we also do hobby stuff too, admittedly a bit rarely because we've been catching up on all the 3D printers we got over the Christmas period. So again, thanks for watching, thanks for your time. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, hit that notification bell. Thank our patrons who are up on the screen now, but until next time, I'll see you guys. Fohammer out.